All right, everyone. Hello. Thank you for being here today at the beginning of our series, The Excellent Assistant. My name is Joshua Vonderheide, and I am the founder of the Percussion Conservatory. And today I am joined by a very special guest. He is my former teacher, which is very exciting. He also just so happens to be the associate principal timpanist and section percussionist of the Houston Symphony, and also the associate professor of percussion at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University, Mr. Matthew Strauss. And today he's going to be presenting his class, Why Not Do Both, covering topics from both percussion and timpani, and inspiring you to take that plunge into doing both. So Matt, thank you so much for being here. I just want to quickly shout out to everyone that at the bottom of your screen right now, you'll see that there is a chat and a Q&A function. So as the class is going on, please do submit your questions into the Q&A so that Matt can answer them for you at the end of his presentation. So, Mr. Strauss, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Josh and Stephen and the Percussion Conservatory for having me. I've been doing a lot of these remote classes, obviously, in the last year and a half, and it's always a great experience because you learn a lot about how to present this way. So it's been a lot of fun. And yes, I've known Mr. Vonderheide for quite some time now, and it's so wonderful to chat with you and him in this format and to talk about drums. I mean, that's the best thing to talk about. So in the spirit of the excellent assistant, I thought my class, Why Not Do Both, would be very germane to the discussion. Because obviously, why not do both? You have to do both if you want to be an associate or assistant principal timpanist / percussionist in most orchestras across the world. So I do want to start out. I want to make sure I can share my screen here so everyone can see it. Give me one moment. And we should be sharing right now. And Josh, chime in if I am not sharing it.
Absolutely, you are good to go. We can see that very clearly.
That is beautiful news. Thank you. Why not do both? So I wanted to talk about something here. My experience as both a performer who's auditioned for many orchestras in the United States, as well as an educator who's taught at a few schools. I currently teach now, as Josh had said, at Rice University, it's the Shepherd School of Music here in Houston, Texas. I taught for a decade at University of Miami, the Frost School of Music with Svet Stoyanov there, and even before that at Rutgers University as an adjunct. So I've seen a lot of students, and myself at auditions. I always noticed I would go to a timpani audition, right? And there'd be all the great players there. And maybe a few months later, I might attend a percussion audition. It was almost completely different cast of characters, different people, maybe a handful of crossovers like myself. And I always wondered, why is that? I couldn't imagine not doing both timpani and percussion. And as an educator at all these schools with all these students and at festivals and coachings, I'd always see a lot of students, they'd gravitate to maybe one or the other. In the world of concert percussion, that is, they'd say, you know what, I want to be a timpanist. The snare drum rolls and excerpts on xylophone, forget about it. Or a percussionist is like, got very intimidated by the notion of tuning and other things. So I always saw that. So I want to encourage everyone to delve deeply, simultaneously, and successfully into the worlds of timpani and percussion. The relationship between the two disciplines isn't just symbiotic, but advantageous in your quest to becoming a complete musician. Now, let's talk about sound concepts first. Experienced timpanists, we often think about different stroke types to produce a sound. We think about different mallet choices, of course, as well as even beating spots on the drum head. Now, it's important to address the ever-changing variables, such as different concert halls, different types of timpani, what composer you're playing, the period of music, the conductor, what he or she might prefer. Timpanists are always thinking about these things. It's funny because my percussion playing really greatly benefited from this level of timbral exploration by adding qualities to the music that went above and beyond the fundamental expectations of just solid rhythm and placement, steady time, and note accuracy. I increased my sound palette by opening up my ears to a larger array of stick and mallet choices while discovering an ever-growing library of colors through a variety of newly adopted stroke types and techniques. So let's explore some of these concepts that I've talked about. The stroke types, the mallet instrument choices, and beating spots. Let's explore some of these concepts that help me bridge these two worlds, the world of timpani and concert percussion, into one world. I want to start out with the repertoire. What better way to show you these differences and similarities that become similarities through the repertoire that we so commonly play. So let's start out with something we all know, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. You'll notice that I'll always list the orchestra and the conductor in the musical examples that I will share with you during this class. So that second movement, that famous excerpt, this one right there, you're going to see something before I play for you. You see where those red vertical slashes are above the 11 bars of quarter notes. My stroke type there, and I want to talk about stroke type, completely crafts the type of sound I want to get. In this case, I talk about the intensity. Well, when you're thinking intensity, stroke type, what do you mean? Well, for me, that really means the velocity. That's the speed of the stroke and what type of grip I'm doing. So a quick velocity stroke coupled with all my fingers on the stick using nothing but wrist and short and confined strokes is going to give you a staccato, very vertical stroke. That's why I have those vertical slashes over it. So let's listen to the music, remind ourselves of how it sounds in the orchestra. And now, Josh, if you could share my performance of the same excerpt without the orchestra. Thank you. So hopefully you can all see from the camera angle above that I'm keeping my strokes very confined. I've got a bit more of a firm grip than I usually like to have a fluid free grip, but some cases you need that intensity, and that stroke type was very beneficial to produce that sound. Now that's a great timpani part, right? What about a great percussion part? Shostakovich's 10th Symphony, second movement, rehearsal 98 to the end. There's a fantastic snare drum part, looks like this, and it has all these 16th notes. And those 16th notes, I really want them to emulate a machine gun. This is very a militant sound. This movement is a portrait of Stalin. So I want to try to get that sound by getting pretty much the same exact type of stroke that I did during those chord notes in Beethoven 9. Those 16th notes are going to be very wristy. I'm going to have all of my fingers on the stick, because normally I only have my thumb, my pointer finger, and my middle finger, because I like the stick to actually breathe. But in some cases, I don't want it to breathe that much. And in this case, I want a dictatorial sound. Let's listen to the excerpt with the orchestra. amazing every time I hear it. That was one of my old teachers, Alan Abel, playing that snare drum part. So how about we listen to Matthew Strauss play that? We watch Matthew Strauss play the same part. Thank you. Of course, when I'm playing the rolls, you might have noticed I take my fourth and fifth fingers off the stick because I need the stick to vibrate much better when I'm doing a roll versus those acute, sharp 16th notes. So we're talking about stroke types, of course, and I just gave you two examples, one in the world of timpani, one in the world of percussion, where I'm using the same stroke to get the same type of result, intensity. Now, when we talk about stroke types, besides intensity, we also talk about oftentimes what type of stroke you're doing. I'm doing an upstroke, I'm doing a downstroke, I'm doing a full stroke. So let's talk about upstrokes, downstrokes, and full strokes. First, there's some pragmatic uses of upstrokes, downstrokes, and full strokes. I'm going to show you an example, but we've all had a situation where you have a forte, and then you got to get to a subito piano. What do? You got to do a downstroke for that last forte note to get down to that stick height, mallet height, even cymbal height to get the softer dynamic. So a perfect example is the cymbal part in the second movement of Scheherazade. And you'll see in the music here, there's this little march type section. And there's this downbeat at the rehearsal letter in the beginning there. And you have to do a downstroke because it's mezzo forte. And then you got to end up pianissimo. So you stay down, and then you're right where you need to be to get very even, smooth pianissimo strokes. Here's the music just to remind you how it sounds. And now I want to show you guys me doing the same thing, and you'll see visually, you'll see how I stay very close after that initial mezzo forte crash. By the way, a couple of things here I want to point out about that is that I do mute. I fit in a really quick mute there to help me with the pianissimo. So, of course, I have to stay down and not bring the cymbals out. Now, one thing about cymbal playing is, guys, when you stay down, there is more of a chance of getting, say, an air pocket or a clunky sound. So you have to be really careful about the angle of the two cymbals, and even though I'm staying down, it's still coming off just a tiny bit. And the other thing, you can't tell from that video, it's like a little secret. So I do the quick mute, but I have my left cymbal against my body, and that first crash, the first pianissimo crash, just one cymbal striking the muted other one. It's a little trick. I do that a lot for that subito stuff. And then after that, I subtly and stealthily take it away from my body, and no one knew the better. And it sounds pretty darn good. And those cymbals I recommend, those are Zildjian Vintage Orchestral Medium Lights. Those are fantastic cymbals. They have a lot of uses, especially for your general soft playing, but they get loud enough to, say, do a crash like the beginning of this excerpt. Now, another reason why we talk about upstrokes and downstrokes and full strokes is for the character of the music as well. Let me show you an example here. Back to the world of timpani, by the way. In the overture to Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, he utilizes this dotted 8th, 16th rhythm. And you can see where I have these two up red arrows. That rhythm is used a lot in Mozart and a lot of his pieces. It's a very regal, elegant, king-like rhythm. And it's like, it's very sophisticated. Dum ba da. I love that. And I don't want to just do a generic stroke. I definitely don't want to do a downstroke because that's going to darken it. What do upstrokes do? They bring out the sound. They bring out more high partials, really, of the sound. So it makes it brighter, more immediate, and actually helps out with the clarity. So I'll do kind of a quick upstrokes just for those two notes to help out. And also, before we go on, you're going to see, I want to first play this for you so you can hear it and just pay attention to that bum ba da in the music. And before we watch me do it, I want to show you something else. In the world of percussion, there's a great snare drum part by Prokofiev from Peter and the Wolf. The very end of this story, this piece, there's a great snare drum part, and it's basically the Peter's theme. Boom, boom, ba-dum, ba-bum, ba-da. That's played like very slowly. So there's this majestic military type, triumphant feel to it. Anyway, there you see our friend, all these dotted H16ths there. There's a few of them, and you can see where I put the up arrows. It's literally the same type of stroke as I do on the timpani. Let's just listen to this also before we watch me play both the Mozart on timpani and then the Prokofiev on the snare drum. And now we're going to check out the next two examples with me playing those two pieces. Great. And basically, you can hopefully see that I'm doing basically the same stroke, even though it's two different instruments. One drum's a little smaller than the other. I did want to point out, I like to always point out what instruments and sticks and mallets I like to use. On the timpani, I was using these little tiny flannel mallets that are made in Vienna. They're made by Kaufmann. Kaufmann. I like them because they're really small-headed and they get that type of sound that you might want in Mozart. Although I would admit, if I was playing that in the orchestra, I'd probably be using wooden sticks, and hopefully I'd be playing on goatskin heads on some Schneller timpani. And with the snare drum, you saw that aluminum drum. That's a Pearl Philharmonic Series aluminum drum. They make phenomenal instruments, and there's all different sizes, and I have a lot of them. And then I was using my sticks made by ProMark, the Matthew Strauss ones, General Concert Generals, the number ones, MS1. Anyway, so yeah, they work really well. So back to my class. I do want Josh to show us one more thing before he does. I want to say regarding upstrokes, downstrokes. The next example is, I just gave you some upstroke examples. What about downstrokes? So, if I'm trying to get some clarity and elegance and that type of feel for the upstrokes, sometimes pieces require the exact opposite. The second timpani part of Wagner's funeral music from Götterdämmerung, from the amazing ring cycle, which, believe it or not, I was literally discussing the ring cycle to my daughter Lily last night. She's 7, because she asked about mythology to me. She's like, do you know anything about Zeus? And I'm like, where are you learning this stuff? This is, yeah, let's talk about it. And then I said, but a lot of times in music, mythology is these stories, and especially in opera. And I started thinking about the ring cycle and Wotan, and she's like, tell me more. So we're going to download or rent or whatever the ring cycle, and I'm going to watch 4 Wagner operas with my 7-year-old. We'll see how long that goes, but why not, right? But anyway, it's very dark funeral music, right? Götterdämmerung. It starts out with this really soft bum bum. So I'm going to be doing a very slow stroke type. I'm going to be using softer mallet. I'm going to turn my hand over so my knuckles are facing the ceiling. I'm going to probably play a little bit more into the drum, downstroke. Let's just check that out, Josh. Thank you. So you could see that I stayed down at the drum after the bum bum, because why not? At that volume, it's not going to be an ugly sound, downstroke. It's going to be just a darker sound. And as long as the mallet is soft enough and has the right weight, obviously if it's way too heavy, then you're not going to get any tone, very little pitch. But if it's too light, you're defeating the purpose of trying to get a dark sound. Now, back to the world of stroke types. I have some other times I've had examples where I just couldn't find the right type of stroke for my library of strokes. So I started thinking about things, and I started creating like new hybrid strokes, if you will. And, oh, I forgot to show you the music. We all know what Götterdämmerung looks like now, those C sharps. Now, Tchaikovsky, Symphony Number 4. This is a very famous piece. If you get an orchestra job, you will be playing this a lot. And it's with good reason. It's phenomenal repertoire. In the first movement, there is a very famous timpani part where there's repeated F, C, F, F, C, F. And it goes on for many, many, many measures. This is just the first 4 of them. And it goes on all the way to that excerpt that, ba-bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-da. But the beginning of it, it's soft. It's a very anemic, very thin texture. You're the bass line, this ostinato. And I'm trying to, what type of sound do I want there? What type of sound do I want there? You got to think about what type of sound do you want. In your mind's ear, you got to think about it. So I want something that's pure, beautiful, has a little bit of beginning to the tact, but still in a very sweet way. So I came up with something called the dolce stroke, meaning sweet, dolce. And I literally have the stick over the drum. This is not a marimba mallet, this is not a timpani mallet, it's a marimba mallet, just so we're all clear about that, but that's what's closest to me right now. So anyway, I literally let the grip go there, and what happens is the weight of the mallet brings it to the head, and then after it strikes, then I move my forearm up a little bit. So it kind of softens the attack, and I have the timing so it's not a dead stroke either, obviously. It's just a delayed reaction that I manipulate with my release of my grip and then bringing up my forearm just a little bit. So that's what the music looks like. And if you could show us, Josh, I'm going to play it. And while he's doing that, I found out that when I did that stroke, I was once playing a triangle note, and I had this one special note, and I had to get a good sound. And I had to get the right sound. And I was like, you know what? That dolce stroke seems to work on the triangle. I didn't want too much of an ictus. Even though it's metal on metal, I still wanted a sweeter sound. So I'll demonstrate both for you back to back. Here's the other type. Totally different. One more dolce. Ah. So, other types of specialty strokes that I like to use is for big notes where there is, let's say, they're isolated. In other words, they're slow rhythms. There's not much before or after it, and they're loud, and I have to get a big, broad sound. So a perfect example is the opening of Brahms's First Symphony. There's this repeated C, 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 C. It's just like a nonstop heartbeat. It's so wonderful that he started his first symphony with this. I mean, it's amazing. It's like a timekeeper, but it's Brahms. And Brahms has generally a thicker, broader attack, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the times comparatively to, say, other composers. So let's listen to the music. I don't think that last G was played in that take, in that recording. Just saying. Although the rest of the C's were beautiful. So going back to our friend Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, in the last movement, the bass drum part, and we all know a bass drum's like another timpano. It just doesn't have, or not supposed to have, a pitch to it. But it has a lot of the same properties. It's a big drum with a head on it, and I'll think very much the same way in many of the notes that I play. So you'll see this music here, and some of the isolated notes, especially as we get towards the very end, those big ones, if I use a very whippy, quick wrist motion, it might get a little harsh sounding. So I have to cushion the sound. And I'm gonna demonstrate for you. Josh is gonna show us in a second. But you're gonna see that I use an arm motion. I don't use really much wrist at all for those big notes. So you'll see in the Brahms, all those C's, I'm utilizing an arm technique that actually literally comes from my shoulder. Yes, there's also a little forearm, and yes, there might be a little wrist motion for as a shock absorption system. But the motion's not coming from. It's not emulating from the wrist at all. And then I figured, well, why not? In the bass drum, I need to do the same thing for some of those notes. So I'll definitely use much larger muscle groups to cushion the sound so it doesn't get that sharp attack. So let's see Matthew Strauss play Timpani, Brahms 1, and then the bass drum part for Tchaik 4. Let's pause that for a second, Josh. So hopefully you saw on the overhead camera, you saw that I had very little skin on the sticks. Because when you're using a big, large muscle group, the one danger is you might start sounding clubby or oafy. So you have to do something to mitigate that. So for me, that is having very little flesh on the stick. I think I literally have my thumb and my pointer finger on the stick, so the stick can vibrate and do whatever it wants to do. It's like, okay, I'm putting you through a lot here. I'll let you do what you want to do, just as long as you deliver that sound for me. Okay? So I just wanted to make sure we understood that. And also, I'm sure you noticed, why is he hitting two drums? I'm not doing it for volume. I can get plenty loud with one drum, but having two Cs kind of, again, gets that goal of broadening the sound a little bit more even. So I feel like that helps. The danger is if you don't tune them well together, that's not the best thing in the world. But of course, you're going to work on your intonation, and it's totally going to be together. Now, because I'm using two, at the end of my growth crescendo to that last G, I got to make a really thick and loud enough and supportive G. So that's what happened there. So yeah, let's check out the bass drum, and hopefully you'll see some more arm motion on some of my bass drum playing.
Hey, just real quick, Matt. We had one question come through specific to this excerpt, which was just that you mentioned right now the answer to the first part of the question, which was, I often see timpanists doing doubling on the timpani for this spot, but is that really necessary? The second part of the question is, and if so, how about your mallet choice for this?
Great questions. Well, I mean, it's not as necessary as, say, drinking water or breathing good air. But it is a choice I make to broaden the sound even more. If I was in an audition and I wasn't totally comfortable with the drums, maybe I would choose not to do that in the audition. Although I would say almost all auditions I have done it because I like to go for it anyway. But obviously, you're going to be just fine if you do it on one drum. But I do two there because why not? It was fun to do. Why not? Why not do both? Why not do both drums? And that particular example, I was using these mallets by Jeffrey Luft. He's a very talented craftsman here, lives in Ohio, and he makes a bunch of lines of timpani mallets. I was using his F, as in like felt F4s. So those are the biggest felt mallets. He makes great timpani mallets. My colleague in the Houston Symphony, Leo Soto, he has a whole line of timpani mallets that they're carbon fiber timpani mallets that are made by Jeffrey Luft. And I failed to mention also, when I was playing the Tchaikovsky 4, those beautiful Dolce notes, I was using these sticks that are made by another very talented mallet maker. I think in the same minute, I'm giving you two of the 3 or 4 best mallet makers, in my opinion, in this country. And the other one, his name is Scott Crawford, Crawford, and he makes these great mallets. They're not officially called this, but we call them the MS1s and the MS0s, which are mini versions of the ones. I was using the MS1s. They're a great medium, soft, general stick that has, for me, I think, the perfect weight for a lot of big things. The MS0 do the job of things where you need a little bit more articulation. So check him out. And I see Joshua Vonderheide is like a puma. He's really quick with all this information, following up as I discuss them. So that's great. I also love to use Tim Genis's mallets, the mallets that he makes himself. He makes some phenomenal flannel and leather mallets, as does Mr. Kato, who lives in Japan. So these are all great mallet makers that I use a whole wide array of mallets, and even more than the ones I just mentioned. So, so let's go check out that arm-tight bass stroke playing the bass drum now. I love the flip. That's so ridiculous. All right, anyway, so you can see like such a vast array of stroke types even on the bass drum with all that rhythmic stuff. I'm very confined to the drum. Does this sound familiar? Confined, wrist-only strokes. I'm just off the center because I need to be that dry. I'm using a lot of mute. Even my muting changes. The muting goes closer to where I'm playing as I really need it dry. And as I get a little further away, I use more arm, less muting, and it's the exact opposite. So any questions before I move on now? Because I'm going to be leaving the discussion about stroke types, and now I'm going to talk about mallet and instrument choices.
Guys, if you have any questions about different types of stroke types that Mr. Strauss has just presented for you, or if you have any questions about these specific excerpts that you've seen so far, do drop them in the chat or the Q&A so we can answer them. But Matt, why don't you go ahead? I don't see any right now, so why don't you go ahead and continue, and we can always circle back at the end of the class if we need to.
Absolutely. That's right. And you guys could ask, it doesn't have to be about the topic that I'm talking about. It could be anything that, like, you're thinking, oh yeah, what type of mallets? Tell me about what do you think about the oboe part there? I mean, whatever.
Matt, did you see, here's one question. I love the way that bass drum sounds. What mallets are those?
Good question. So those are metal mallets. They're steel. Now these mallets I've been using since I've been in college. And the reason is the folks that I studied with, and I studied in my master's with Alan Abel at Temple University. And prior to that, I went to Juilliard and I studied with Greg Zuber. And my first year, even before that, my freshman year, I studied with Buster Bailey, and then he had retired after that year. But Greg Zuber is principal of the Met, and Greg Zuber had also studied with Alan Abel when he was a student. And anyway, so at the Philadelphia Orchestra, where Alan Abel used to play, they used to play in a concert hall called the Academy of Music. This concert hall basically shaped the entire sound of the Philadelphia Orchestra. It was a very dry, large hall. And if you played with mallets or motions that were too small or pointy, you sounded very thin and insignificant. So everything had to be big. There was a lot of larger muscle groups. The strings had this lush, rich sound because they had to really dig in and pull the bow, and they support the sounds in the wind and in the wind section, and everything was just bigger and rounder. That's why I had this lush sound, because they had to for that hall. If you went to Severance Hall at the Cleveland Orchestra and played like that, it would have been trickier because things are more immediate there. So they had to play a smaller comparatively. So it just depends on how many years you play in a specific room that will formulate how you play sometimes. Also, what type of conductor you're playing with. Does the conductor go like this or that? And so you have to just roll with the punches sometimes. But in this case, it was a good punch because it made the Philadelphia Orchestra sound the way they sound. So anyway, along those lines of providing support in your sound and a big enough sound, they used a heavier material, not wood, but metal. And there's a whole line of bass drum beaters that they started making for themselves. They didn't sell it necessarily at the time. They would just make it, and they would teach their students how to make it, and they'd get these steel dowels, and you'd wrap different layers of masking tape around it. That would be the core, and then you wrap the German felt over it. Now, I will tell you, there is someone that makes these mallets. Her name is Amy Putnam, Putnam. She lives in Washington State, and I think that she calls it the Alan Abel line. So definitely, if you want these, check it out. You could buy them. Because if you go yourself and try to get steel, there's different grades of steel. And if you could get a mallet that's too heavy too, then you're kind of in trouble. But you know what? It's good to experiment. For sure, that's how you learn. So talking about mallet and instrument choices is a good segue, by the way. I wanted to bring up the earlier point just to remind you about our responsibility of accommodating multitude of variables. Again, the different halls that I was just talking about, how big the orchestra is. I saw the Shepherd School Chamber Orchestra play. It was the first concert in our brand new concert hall. We have a whole nother building now. It's this opera hall, but we're also using it for chamber orchestra and stuff. And they're playing Beethoven 1. And my student Riley played so beautifully on that. And they played this piece by the Italian composer Dalla Piccola. And then we played Kodai Dances of Galanta. And I always remember talking to my students, well, this is a 40-piece orchestra. It's not an 80 to 100-piece orchestra. And this is a very live hall, and it's smaller. So we have to think about the sticks we're using and how we play them. So it's a perfect example. So what's amazing is there's so many different choices at our disposal now to purchase. I've just been in this one class seeing all these different names of makers and producers. So the vast amount of choices, the brands, the materials, the dimensions, length, diameter, width, let's just cut through all that noise for a moment. And first, like I was saying earlier, you got to sing the part and formulate the type of sound you want in your mind's ear, and then experiment. Now, a perfect example of this, and I'll give you an example. I'm going to share my screen again here, is a piece by a Spanish composer. His name is Emmanuel de Falla, and he wrote this ballet called The Three-Cornered Hat. And he also did an orchestral suite of 3 movements, music from this ballet, and it's the final dance, the 3rd movement, which we're literally playing in the Houston Symphony in a few days from now, just by chance. There is this really, well, the percussion writing's fantastic, but there's also this great cymbal part. I have it bracketed here just so you can follow along with the score form part, that there's the cymbal part. And I'll show you right here, you got some rolls that are equal to a dotted half note. Here's equal to a half note, a quarter note. Starting at 4 after 6, you have 8th note rolls. And and then in the last bar, in the last line, there's 5 of those measures in the row. 1 in a row. 1. I've seen so many people, they play it and they might as well just be like doing like a drum solo with cymbals, because it doesn't matter, because they're using a cymbal that's too large and doesn't speak quickly enough, and they're using mallets that are too heavy and or large, and the cymbal cannot accommodate it. So you have to really think about the tools that you're using. You got to have the right tools for the job. So when I play this, the longer rolls, the ones that are quarter notes in length and longer, I use an 18-inch cymbal, a Zildjian cymbal, suspended cymbal, and I use these medium to medium hard yarn Musser mallets. But then I switched to a 15-inch cymbal for the short duration rolls, and I go to these Ron Von. They have these little spandex material on top of it. They're tiny little cores, but it's still soft enough to be able to play a roll on a cymbal. So as long as the cymbal's small enough and you're rolling quickly enough, and then I snap out those release notes, and you have to muffle them really quickly. This is one of the few I don't have my own example of playing it, but let's listen to the music so you can at least hear it in context. Here. So I'll have you know, as far as the instruments are concerned, for suspended cymbals, I'd say only 20% of the time am I using cymbals that are literally produced saying orchestral suspended. The majority of the time I'm using cymbals that are just made for the drum set, and I literally went to Zildjian factory many years ago, and I went to what they call the vault. That's where they have all the drum set cymbals. First, I checked out the orchestral suspended cymbals, and I bought a couple, and they're great. I got a 20, and then I got a 16. And then Keith Oleo was there, and we went to the vault, and for hours, we were going through cymbals. Hours. It was so much fun. And now I have a great collection of suspended cymbals, a lot of which are designated as drum set cymbals, but who cares? As long as you're getting the right sound, you can call it whatever. You can call it a puppy. Doesn't matter what you call it, as long as it sounds good. So that's a good example there. Now, sometimes it gets fun. You can get really creative with regards to your mallet and stick choices. Let's take this as an example. Concerto for Orchestra by Bartók. In the second movement, there's this famous snare drum solo, except it's without snares. You can see Bartók writes that. And it's throughout the movement, there's these interjections of the solo line. And you can see that I'm thinking, without snares, do I want it to sound like a snare drum without snares? And I started thinking about Bartók and how he went to the countryside for a lot of his career, and he would record different folk melodies and folk music in the countryside in all these Eastern European countries. And I'm thinking, well, did they have it like an orchestral snare drum, or they had different types of drums? And I'm thinking, man, I want to make this less orchestral sounding. Let me kind of take that out of there by maybe softening up the attack and not using a wooden snare drum stick. So I found that I used a really hard timpani mallet, and I had to get the right weight and make sure it wasn't muting the drum because it was too heavy or soft for a snare drum. So I ended up using this stick, and you'll see it in a second when I demonstrate. But then also you're going to see another thing. So Josh can play them both in a row. But before he does that, there's a timpani part, because again, that's this whole class. I bounce around from the world of timpani and percussion. An overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream by Mendelssohn. This is a phenomenal overture. And there's this really cool little timpani part in the middle of it. And it's kind of like a Turkish march almost, I guess. And remember, this music is in one. It's one. Brum, brum, bum, bum. Brum, 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 bum, bum. So it's really fast, or you could be conducting it in 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. But let's listen to it first. And after we listen to this, then we'll see me playing a timpani mallet on a percussion instrument, and you're going to see me playing a snare drum sticks on this Mendelssohn on the timpani, and you'll see why. I'll explain why afterwards. I want to go back and see, remind myself, London Symphony. Whoever played that did a fantastic job. That sounded really good and clear. Anyway, so let's have Josh play. I'll play the Bartok on snare drum, and then you'll see me playing this Mendelssohn on timpani. So the video, at least on my side, for the Bartok was a little choppy, but the audio was fine. But yeah, you can see I'm using that same Kaufman small flannel timpani mallet for the Bartok. And then on the Mendelssohn, I'm using my snare drum sticks, and I mute the heck out of the drums. And I'm just doing a doubles for the fast 16th notes. And I justify it to myself. I'm like, you know what? This is military. I almost feel like it should feel like a military tenor drum almost. Just kind of has a pitch to it. And just for that little section, that's what I do there. So, it looks like you have a comment or a question.
Yeah, Matt, just wanted to jump in really quick. We had a question about with the excerpt where the Cleveland Orchestra was playing and George Zell was conducting. The attendee wanted to know if the timpanist for that recording was Cloy Duff, if you know.
I would say there's a 99.9% chance of that being true.
I would say so as well. That sounds about right. All right,
Yes.
And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we talked about stroke types. We've talked about mallet and instrument choices. The last thing I had talked about was the beating spots and how we change up the beating spots. In both the worlds of timpani and percussion, really, it's the same thing. So we talked about changing the color. And remember, I discussed this when we were doing the Goddard-Dameron. Not only was I talking about doing the downstroke and using the right mallet, the right tool for the job, but I also moved in on the drum, a little further away from the edge. That, of course, darkens the sound. But there's other reasons why we want to change our beating spot. Another one is for rhythmic clarity. Now, we've already done Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, the ending of it. I've showed you on bass drum. let's talk about on cymbals. Whoops. There we go. So this time I do have the audio so we can listen to it. I know we all know this, but I'm going to play it anyway. I just played this with the Grand Teton Music Festival literally 5 weeks ago. It's memorable because after you're in a pandemic, while the Houston Symphony played all but 3 months of this pandemic, it was smaller pieces, chamber music and chamber orchestra. So when you start playing Ravel, Alvarado del Gracioso, and Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, it leaves an imprint. So anyway, let's listen to this. So you might be thinking, what is Matthew Strauss talking about with regards to beating spots and cymbal part for Tchaik 4, Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony here? Well, here's the thing. When I'm playing all these eighth notes, obviously the repeated eighth notes starting towards the end, but even when I have like 3 or more in a row, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha, I find that if I dutifully play just lined up the way we normally play big crashes, I feel like, hey, that's too much juice. Like, I don't need all that sound for repeated notes. I need clarity. I'm not going da-da-da, da-da-da, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha. Everyone would be so upset at me if I played full volume there anyway. Plus, the cymbals I use are very loud anyway. So I find that when I displace, changing the beating spot, and one edge of the cymbal is striking another cymbal a little further away from the edge, it helps out with the clarity. Because when you make cymbals in the factory, they're hammering this wad of metal. They hammer it out. They keep on doing it. And as it goes out, the metal gets thinner. So it stands to reason that if you're striking one cymbal against the other here and the other one's down there, it's actually activating at a thicker part of the metal, so it's going to bounce off easier. And that's going to give you more clarity. So I will displace for faster, even somewhat loud rhythms. As I get to the more isolated notes, like the first 3 bars and towards the end, and any quarter notes maybe, I'm not displacing as much. Now, let's watch me do that first. Thanks, Josh. So yeah, hopefully you could see there's that displacement there. That helped out, especially those cymbals. Those cymbals are risk-reward cymbals. Those are Zildjian K Symphonic 18-inch. Phenomenal cymbals. They're like turbocharged. They're very loud, but they're a little thicker and they're a little stiffer. So if you don't have the right angle, or if you don't pull apart quickly enough, or any of the above, you might have some issues with your consistency. So you have to like develop your upper body strength literally to have them controlled enough. But when they're hitting correctly and you figure them out, it's really worth it, because then you have that brilliance in your sound and the immediacy of each attack. Very important. But they also spread beautifully. Like the attack really goes right into the sustain in a very organic way, the way they're made. That was an 18-inch, Mr. Britton. Misprint, sorry. Actually, where are you from? Can you tell me where you're from? Can you type? Because I can't see anyone.
Yeah.
Panama. Do you know my friend Pedro Fernandez? Yes, you do know Pedro. He's my former student and a dear friend of mine as well. And by the way, there was a great band in town here in Houston called Pedrito Martinez Group. And you probably know this, but he has a trombonist who's from Panama. Do you know that? Yes! The only time I've been in Panama was in the airport because I took Copa Airlines. I never got to actually check it out. But anyway, yeah, they're 18-inch. To answer your question, 18-inch. So, yeah. Did I miss any other questions, Josh?
No. We have a couple questions in the Q&A, but we'll do them at the end.
Got it. Understood. Okay, so we're talking about rhythmic clarity. We're talking about displacement. There's other reasons why you want to talk about beating spots for reasons of getting rhythmic clarity. Let me show you something. Going back to the world of timpani. Symphony number 1, Beethoven. Just heard this last night, like I had said, my student playing it. And in the third movement, the trio, at the end, there's these sforzandi written. Now, I'm sure we've all had this experience. Even you feel like, man, I don't get it. My sticks are hard. I'm playing evenly, but for some reason, my accents or my sforzandi are not all even. Because the timpani, the membrane, the head, is going like this. And depending on how you're striking it and what mallets you're using, the mallet might catch it when it's down here, and the next time when it's up here, and it pops out. You're like, why did that just happen? I didn't do that. Well, the drum said, well, I'm doing it. So for me, I found out through trial and error and experimentation that if I strike these sforzandi in a different beating spot, like a lug's worth away, it was easier to get the clarity. One might say, well, why would you want to do that? We're all taught the same in or near the same beating spot. Well, in this case, the notes are so fast, no one can tell. It's kind of like the idea of like you're swimming in a lake and there's like 20 people swimming in the swimming area and everyone's splashing around. You can't tell any wave from anyone's movement where it came from because there's too many interfering with each other. But then all of a sudden, about a mile down the lake, no one's there, and some kid's playing by the side and throws one little stone in it, and you see a beautiful wave emulate that expands from that point of impact. So that's kind of like what this is. Let's listen to this part with the orchestra. And Josh, if you will. Thanks. So, yeah, you can see I'm playing a different beating spot for those sforzandi. Also, just to let you know, I don't think I've mentioned this. The drums I use are Adams Dresden Classics. Those are the ones, at least in the video. And also, the sticks I was using are the Tom Freer Baroque sticks that he makes. They're really great. I use them for a lot of stuff. I used them last week with the Houston Symphony. I played timpani on the Beethoven Triple Concerto. And Leo played timpani on Beethoven 5 after that. It was all Beethoven. And I used the Adams Schneller timpani with the one tuning knob crank. And it's goatskin heads. And I was using those exact mallets on the entire third movement. The last movement, it was perfect. So that's a perfect example of that. So anyway, the Beethoven 1. Now, another reason why we might talk about beating spots, and this is the last reason I want to offer you, is for the reasons of dynamics and character. So I want to show you something as I share the screen. Now, you can see the red to the red. I measured it. It was 29 inches. For those of you who use the metric system, sorry. I don't even know what that is. I can't do the conversion. But anyway, that's my normal beating spot. But what would happen if sometimes I moved in further? You can see that blue line. It's like literally half the distance. And when I have to play with hard mallets, fast rhythms, but not too loudly, that might be a good solution. So a perfect example of that is, again, same piece, same movement, Symphony number 1. Earlier on in the movement, it starts out as forte. You're like, oh, forte, that's loud. Forte means loud. Well, in Beethoven 1, forte is like a loud mezzo piano for me, honestly, especially in an audition, because I really want to show that contrast when it suddenly goes up to the fortissimo. I really like that idea. And even the fortissimo in Beethoven 1 is not wailing. It's just Beethoven 1. We're talking about a 35 to 45 piece orchestra. So I'll play near the gauges, starting at the pickup to A, and then where it's fortissimo, I go back to my normal beating spot. It's loud enough for me to not have any issues with going from one drum to the next. It's stealthy and no one ever knows, and it feels good. Now, the one thing you're going to have to be careful about, though, is if you're playing at closer to where the gauges are, where that blue line is, those dots, the ends of the blue lines, you still have to make sure your sticks are going to be pretty much on the same circumference. So you got to work on the stick placement to make sure your right hand's not uneven with your left hand. That's the one thing that I have to mention with this. So let's listen to it. And now, Josh, we can see me doing it now. Thanks. Also, you see these mutes on the drum. I have synthetic heads on that particular set, and what helps, I want to get rid of that like synthetic ring, that wah, wah, wah sound. So it helps when you actually put some muting on it, not only for clarity, but for that like sound a little bit closer to that being of a skinhead, in my experience. That's why you're seeing those on there, if you were wondering. Now, I'll keep on going unless there's a question there. So we talked about sound concepts a lot because that is really important. But let's talk about practice approach. Now, in my experience, successful percussionists, orchestral percussionists, concert percussionists, they're super methodical, super organized, and really they have to be because there's just so many instruments and notes to learn. It's like nonstop, especially with all the solos. I mean, these days to be a successful orchestral percussionist, you have to be a really good soloist also and chamber musician. It's not like you're just learning some excerpts and you're going to punch it out. You got to like learn a lot of repertoire, and a lot of the editions have like 4 or 5 solos on them now anyway. So, and it makes sense. And there's a lot of new music or movie music that you have to play with very demanding parts. So that's super important. I was using the mutes were these mutes that had magnets. So we just got a question. The mutes are these. There's like, it's like a fleece material. When you go skiing and you wear like a little fleece underneath your jacket, or it's a fleece material, but it had a magnet sewn into the end of it, so it could just stay onto the hoop, the metal hoop of the drum. I got it from a company that used to be called Rhapsody Percussion. It's no longer around. At least I don't think it is. But Tom Freer makes that, and he uses like super powerful magnets. Like I'd imagine like you could like hold it up, and if a plane goes by, you'll fly up to it. It's super powerful, but they stay on, and that's what's important. So they're great for auditions because you got them. You just go blip, 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 and they're on. You don't have to like tie anything on, or you don't have to worry about falling off the drum. So they're good product to own. You could also make your own if you're good at sewing. Honestly, I have a couple of students that have done that. So practice approach. There's things that I've done. I used to be a very disorganized person growing up. I really was. I was super I would get overwhelmed and I would just kind of shut down. I wouldn't even try to solve the problem. It was just too much. And I'd stop practicing for that day and I'd hit it back the next day. Luckily, I was persistent enough where it would work out. But then as I got older, I'm like, this is not enough. And I started figuring out ways to become more on top of things, to prepare better, to organize, to get more organized. And it's when I started doing that, I could see that it really paid dividends. It helped me out. I was more consistent. I was more confident. And confidence is key, by the way, when you're a performer, an artist, anything, really in life. Confidence is a big deal. At first, you have to fake the confidence, and then eventually it does actually happen. Trust me. So how do you fake it? Well, you give yourself as many tools as possible, being organized, being prepared. So for example, it got to a point where like, I would be like, you know what? And this is on timpani and percussion. I was like, when I do a mock audition, I'm not always playing the tempo that I've been practicing it out, that I wanted to do it. So I started making these charts, a tempo equivalent, a tempo chart, I mean. And what would happen is I would have a certain amount of time where I would start to learn a piece of music, or I learned it, but I was getting it back in my hands to have performance audition level quality. But I wouldn't just start practicing at the tempo. I would take 2, 3, or 4 weeks and methodically bring it up. And I literally predetermined on what day at what tempi I'm going to be practicing it. I would do 3 tempi a day, overlapping. So 1 new tempo a day. The previous 2 I had been doing already until I made it to my target tempo. And then there'd be another week of me reducing the click to where maybe there was a click only on a downbeat every 2 or 4 bars. And then you know you have the confidence. I did all the work. I ironed out every wrinkle on the way. And now I know my time is solid. So by having just a chart and sticking with the plan that I predetermined, that was very empowering. To keep myself honest, I'd also do like preparation timelines. So like the broader timeline. Week 1, I start learning new notes. Week 3, start increasing the tempi with that chart I just talked about. Oh, I have to travel somewhere on July 12th. Okay, I can't bring a xylophone, so I'll bring my snare drum, my triangle. Okay, I'm going to focus on all the triangle excerpts to make sure I didn't leave those behind. You know, whatever you start thinking about with your timeline, so you keep yourself honest and with the plan. Once you have yourself a practice plan, a preparation plan, again, empowering, there's less things going to be dropped. Because we've all been there where you get close to an audition or a performance and something creeps up on you and you're like, ugh, I really should have put that in my timeline earlier on. And to help you stay with your timeline on a daily basis, you'll just have a journal jotting all the things down in shorthand that you've been doing. It's again, empowering to write something down. So this level of diligence that I did in my percussion practicing, and I won the Houston Symphony as a just section percussionist, I started bringing to my timpani preparation. Because a lot of timpanists, I find, they're like, you know what, it's just all about the sound, and they don't think that much about it. And they're talented, these people, but they maybe never win the job because there's actually a lot more specificity that you have to practice, whether it comes to ear training or pedaling and even where your sticks are in the stick bag so you're not flustered. Wait, where are those number 2s again? And all these things to think about ahead of time. Tuning schemes, what order of drums do you tune? What tuning forks are you going to listen to? What am I doing in the warm-up room? There's all these things. So that level of diligent preparation in the world of percussion, I brought that to timpani, and then I started advancing routinely in timpani auditions after that. So an example of that was intonation. So instead of just saying, yeah, I've got a pretty good ear, I'm like, no, I'm going to practice ear training every day like I practice striking the drum. I would sing intervals, and I'd sit at the piano, an in-tune piano, and I'd sing all different intervals up and down from a specific note in a given day. I would check myself after having had sung it. Is that the final answer? Yes. Okay, good. Now check yourself. I was too sharp. And you start seeing tendencies and trends, and then you can fix them that way. I was doing tuning at the drums, of course, and I would have like a random notes in the range of that particular drum, and I would tune up and down, and I would check myself with a tuner after I did it. And once I was getting pretty good at it, I was like, okay, can I string together 2 tunings before I check myself? In other words, I got the F. Can I get the A flat from the F? Okay, now check yourself. Can I string together 3? F, A flat, C. Now check it. And you get to a point where you get your tuning fork, you get an A, and you tune your F, and you go through the whole line of tuning, and you're at the G, and then you check yourself. And you see if your center of pitch stayed the entire time. So this is pretty diligent practicing for your ear training. Technique. I have to figure out the appropriate sound and make it consistent. So we talked about sound concepts and the appropriate sound, figuring out in your mind's ear. Now you actually have to execute it at a high level and consistently. So everyone thinks, well, they're timpani. It's not like I have to learn, all the xylophone excerpts, but there's actually a very small target on that drum, because for me, I play in the same beating spot for almost all my rhythms. My rolls, I do separate the mallets. And so actually getting your technique is down. So I made a list of basic techniques, the stroke types, and I would dissect what I use to strike the drum: fingers only, wrist only, different speeds of wrist, staccato, legato, wrist plus fingers, then adding forearm. I do it at all different dynamics. I do it at different tempi, different types of speeds, in other words, rhythms within the tempi. And then I'd actually do simple exercises to put it in context. In this case, I was using the Saul Goodman book, but you could use really any book, doesn't matter. I was talking about, this is a roll exercise from that Goodman book, for example. And I'd make it so I do different types of roll attacks. I would do a single note attack, a multiple note attack, no attack, different dynamics, different tempi. I would do muting exercises. I'd literally mute every single note. Or when I went from one drum to another drum, I'd mute the previous while I was playing the next one. And I'd do it from very slow to as fast as possible. It got really funny. You could do it at quarter note equals 160. I'd do... This is also from the Goodman book. I do cross-sticking exercises, but I also play this exercise as shifting. We all know what shifting is. Instead of literally crossing over, which I try not to do because it gets me out of the plane. My hands are not at the same height. I have to now compensate my stroke type to make them even dynamically and timbrally. So shifting is you just get the other one out of the way. But I do practice my cross-sticking also, because there are times you cannot avoid it. And the third way is, instead of cross-sticking and or shifting, the last two notes before going to the next drum would be a double. Think about it. If you're playing really fast rhythms, you're on the 23, and then you got to go down to the 32. You might, if you can't do a left-hand lead, you're doing a right-hand lead, and you do two rights at the end. You have to. There's no choice there. I'm going to be showing you a little later a perfect example of that on a timpani part.
Hey, Matt, can I jump in really quick?
Please.
And we have a couple questions now that you're sort of addressing, so I wanted to get to them from the Q&A. We have
Absolutely.
one that says, how do we practice timpani at home when you don't have access to instruments, and do you think that's efficient? And then also, same attendee, side note, how do we develop the timpani roll stroke, especially developing further range? I'm not exactly sure what that means, but maybe you can decipher it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, practicing at home when you don't have instruments. Well, I already gave you perfect examples, your ear training, right? You could do a lot of that away from the drum. Not to turn this into an audition preparation class, but I will say, I have three tuning forks. I have an A440, I have the E below that A, and the C below that E. And those three notes get me anywhere I want to go. And I don't know how many of you out there have had this issue, but if I just have an A, and especially if I'm a little nervous, that A is not necessarily, I'm hearing it differently than what it is, like I'm hearing it slightly sharp or flat, and then you're out. And then you start questioning yourself. So instead, I always have, at least in the warm-up room or right when I sit down at the drums, I'll first have two pitches. Because so you have an A and an E, there's no mistaking it. It centers your pitch. Then you can take away the E and you tune up your, say, Beethoven 9, A and then the D, for example. But you practice singing around those tuning forks. So I'm singing A up to an E in a major scale. I'm singing La, Si, Do, Re, Mi, La, Do, Mi, La, Mi. And I'm listening to the tuning forks while I'm just La, Si, Do, Re. I'm just singing around the pitches, around the tuning forks to get to the excerpts, the tuning of the excerpts. And then I'll put away my, let's say I'll put away my A tuning fork, and I've got my E, and I'll take, and then from another pocket, my C. And then I got No, Re, Mi, Do, So, Do. Now I'm tuning Brahms 1, So, Do, and Beethoven 1 and Beethoven 5. And then I'm tuning the Britain Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. And I'm literally walking around, pacing around my room like a rabid dog, eager to really center my pitch with these tuning forks, singing. And I'm telling you, that is not a waste of time. Not enough people do that. I don't care if you have 70 sets of timpani at your disposal, you got to be doing that. So that's great at home. Also, listening to the music is really important, right? We actually have to know the tunes to, first of all, inspire you. You know, when we listened to that Shostakovich 10, I was getting inspired in the middle of this class because I love it, you know? And it reminds you, oh yeah, that's why I'm choosing not to try to be a investor. That's why I don't need to make, $3 million a year. I'm going to be a musician. And, yes, you make a living being a musician if you're successful, but still, we're not doing this for the money. I'll tell you that much. So, yes, so that's why, and this is why you're doing it. It's like you get to make art for a living and make other people enjoy themselves because they love it and you love it. It's collaborative. Not to get too off course here, right? But it reminds yourself. Not to mention you're studying the music by listening to it with the parts, try to get the scores as well. So these all work even away from the drums. But then, of course, you can get a timpani practice pad, and you can work on all your stroke types with the metronome, of course. And you can even play the rhythms of all the excerpts on a single surface. Or, as we see Mr. Komps do from Holland, he has 4 different practice pads. So he's literally doing that as well. But yes, at some point you actually have to get on the timpani, but this takes care of a lot of it. So yeah, you can use your time wisely at home. And developing your roll, that's a much larger conversation. The way I roll, I have a lot of finger in my roll. I don't roll just my wrist. I know a lot of people do. For me, the finger, in addition to the wrist, and when it's louder, your forearm, is kind of the vibrato of a sustained tone. It gives it shimmer, it gives it personality, it gives it, the word is brilliance. So there's this, and the wrist is kind of following through. It's a very free type feel to it. I'm not like, Urgh. That's like a machine gun sound. You're going to get more percussive that way. Plus it hurts. So I do various exercises to develop my fingers, literally using nothing but fingers, no wrist at all. Not that I play that way. Very rarely do I only use my fingers in the real world, but I develop them by playing exercise, just building up my fingers. Then I do exercise only with my wrist, then exercise with fingers plus wrist, like I was going through a little bit earlier in that list. But again, and then you build up your roll by doing faster rhythms, consistent rhythms, until you trick yourself into using a finger-generated stroke, and you're like, oh wow, this is the equivalent of doing a roll speed. Obviously, roll speeds change depending on how tight the head is and how the size of the head and even what room you're playing in and how soft your mallets are.
And so, Matt, you answered the second part of the question, which we were trying to decipher. They were asking how to increase the dynamic of your rolls. So when you're working to produce a more full sound, louder sound, and you said, I think, using the different hinges, using the different levers to your advantage, using all of them. But maybe you want to touch on that a little bit more.
Yes.
And one other question that had come through was about, if you don't have access to a practice pad, would you play on pillows? And I kind of wanted to alter that question just slightly to, let's say you don't have access to timpani or timpani practice pad. Do you have any surfaces, any types of surfaces that you have used, like if you're in a hotel or anywhere, and you don't have the stuff with you? Maybe some of our students are just starting out and they haven't purchased all these various instruments. They would love to know some great options that might sort of resemble a timpani head.
Yeah, well, let me finish about the roll. So with regards to the rolls, if I'm doing a really triple forte roll and I only use my wrist and fingers, it's not going to be big enough. So again, as part of that apparatus, you'll see a little more forearm in there, just so it sings, but it's still not tense. It's just full, bigger motions, but not tense. Also, it's true, the softer you get, generally the roll speed will go down. However, it's worth saying that I know a lot of people, they roll too fast, especially as they're crescendoing, and it's what Cloyd Duff used to call pressurizing the roll, and you're actually choking the drum head, and you're trying to let it sing, but you're actually doing the opposite by your gut reaction is to fill it in by going fast, and it's too fast. So I want you guys, when you're practicing, when you are at timpani, practice doing rolls, especially crescendi, because diminuendi take care of themselves a little easier. But when you're doing crescendi, record yourself from 10, 20 feet away, and then change it up. Do one where you purposely get really fast as you get louder. Then do one where you do the exact opposite. You actually slow down, which is going to be overkill because you're going to start hearing the strokes. But believe it or not, you don't get as fast as you need to because you have to let the drums sing. Because the actual volume that you're playing out takes care of the resonance needed, so you don't have to fill it in with quick strokes. So that's a really important thing to figure out. More times than not, people roll too quickly and with too much tension. Surfaces, well, you could play on any type of drum is better than nothing. It could be a snare drum with the snares off. It could be a tom-tom. Something that's rubber, if you don't even have a drum at your home, or a practice pad of any sort, some type of rubber material that you could put on a table could work. Honestly, there was a Masterclass when I was a student at Juilliard, a former percussionist of the St. Louis Symphony. His name is John Cassica. He used to practice his snare drum rolls on every surface, regardless of how hard it was, you know. And it actually does help, although you don't want it to be used to playing on a surface that's completely different than the one you need to be playing on. Yeah, a yoga mat, depending on what type of mat. But yeah, some of them are really thin rubber, and that can kind of help. Just get a little bounce. Maybe you're a hand drummer and you have bongos. Maybe you got to have some type of drum somewhere. Helps. A table would help. I'd practice with both sticks and a mallet because the sticks will bounce better on a table because you want to have that feeling of bouncing, but then you also want to have the feeling of an actual timpani mallet in your hand. Good.
Great. Yeah, that's all the questions, Matt. If you still have time to keep going through the rest of the video and stuff, or anything else you want to talk about,
let's keep on going. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah, I know it's been an awesome class, and you're taking the time to answer all these questions. We'd actually Matt and I didn't discuss exactly how long he had to be here, so I want to make sure that you.
Oh no, I'm good. I'm totally good right now. Now, I want to talk about one more thing. I want to talk about techniques. In other words, techniques that we think about on both the world of timpani and percussion. Embrace the parallels between these two worlds. I'll give you an example. My snare drum playing, I used to get nervous on soft snare drum and it'd be harder for me to play. But when I started realizing that I would use larger muscle groups to support the stick, in other words, I'd bring my elbow up a little bit more, like a little bit more than normal, not like a scarecrow or anything, but a little bit, it engaged the shoulder and triceps. That large muscle group act as a support system for the stick. And now the center of gravity went further back, so it's not pulling the stick down. So I'm allowing the stick to drop onto the head. I call it a drop stroke. And it's a very legato, easier way of playing, and you're using large muscle groups to support it. Now, timpani, you don't need it as much, but there are times, especially when I'm using hard mallets, in this case wood, and soft playing, where I said, you know what, I'm just going to do that drop stroke here. For example, Beethoven 1, the only section I haven't talked about yet, is this crescendo, and I'm using wood sticks, and I know the music is very staccato, but I'm not going to do a quick jerky stroke there. I'm using wood sticks. It's plenty clear. So I'll use a drop stroke. As I grow in volume, I don't necessarily need the drop stroke anymore for the ladder dynamic, as you can see. So let's take a listen to this. And again, this drop stroke, it makes things, use a relaxed grip, you allow the stick to drop onto the drums. It makes things more legato, linear. It gives it a sense of note connectivity. That's why it's really valuable for a lot of the soft snare drum playing. Can we take a look at me doing this, Josh? Perfect. So other times, other things where I think about something that the same way of thinking in the world of percussion and timpani is sticking choices. And specifically, do I alternate or do I do a double? A perfect example is Hindemith's symphonic metamorphosis. A lot of people, they'll do a double right, or if they have the drums set up German style, double left. And I feel like when you do a double at a certain speed, it has a built-in intensity to it. And maybe I don't want intensity there. Maybe here I want all the drums just to sing and be glorious and soloistic and just like fabulous, but not intense necessarily, even though, yeah, it does get loud and it's a solo. So for me, it was worth shifting. I'll literally start with my left hand and shift, not cross stick, but shift out of the way in order to get the freedom of having had chosen alternating instead of the double. And the same thing happens with the same exact rhythm in the magic flute. The opera, there's the glockenspiel part. All the yada-dum, yada-da. I'll literally work it out so I'm doing a left, right, left, or right, left, right. So I'm not doubling because I don't want to ba-ba-ba, but yada-dum. I want connectivity. I want this thing to flow. The only time I have to do doubles is where I have it marked because there's 6 notes in a row, and I had to do a double there, but that's literally the only time in my sticking. So I want you guys to check out me playing both the Hindemith with that, where I chose to alternate, and then on the glockenspiel, the magic flute part, where again I chose to alternate, where a lot of people would do doubles. Those are the MS1s by that guy Scott Crawford I told you about earlier. So that, and by the way, those little tiny sticks with those little brass, those are made by a current student of mine. His name is Brandon Lim, Lim. He actually has a little company, and he makes, I think it's B Lim, he calls it. B as in boy, Lim, percussion. Anyway, he makes triangle clips, and he makes those mallets for magic flute. And they're great because you don't have to try to play so softly. You just play out, and it sounds good. So the other thing is, I wanted to show you one more thing. We talked about when I'm choosing to say alternate. There's times also where I want to purposely, and I mentioned this earlier, use doubling in my stickings. Bartók's Music for Strings, Percussion, Celeste. In the last movement, there's a really awesome timpani part. And it's pretty fast. These like reverse paradiddle type things. And because it's piano, I need articulation, and actually the built-in double helps that cause. Not to mention, I'm not going to be doing cross-taking shifting when it's so soft and that quick. Let's go ahead and watch me do it. Those are made by Kato, K-A-T-O. They're alternating strips of flannel and leather. In the orchestra, I'd probably be using wood there, honestly. But in an audition, maybe a little different there. So yeah, that actually completes my class. I wanted to thank, again, the Percussion Conservatory, Josh and Stephen, for having me. I also want to thank some of my students, former students and current students, who have helped me with some of the clips that you see, and helping me video and do some of the audio mixing. Lucas Sanchez, who's a former student of mine, he was a former student of mine at Rice and University of Miami, actually, and also current students Alex Gardy, as well as Aaron Smith also helped out a lot. And I always like to thank my companies that I play with, of course, the Dario, because I play on Evans Heads, and I play on my sticks, the ProMark signature sticks. I have the number 1s and the number 2s. They're staccato. They have nylon tips. They're fun. And then I want to thank Zildjian, of course, and I want to thank Pearl and Scott Crawford for making beautiful mallets, and, of course, my family for putting up with me. All right. And any questions, of course.
Guys, this is the time to ask your questions. So while you are getting your final questions in order for Mr. Strauss, I would just like to encourage everyone, if you do have the capability to make a donation, if this class has brought you value, which I think the truth is for everyone, that answer is yes. If this class has brought you value, please consider making a donation to the Percussion Conservatory Masterclass Fund. The link is right here. I've just sent it in the chat, and it's on our Facebook post as well. The suggested donation for this class is $20 or $40 for the whole series, so we can keep these masterclasses coming to the whole world and young percussionists for free. And it means so much that you guys have been helping out, and we've been having lots of donations coming through. It's really fantastic to see the community building. And if you don't have that capability, it's okay. Please just share this content. When you guys see it come out on Facebook, when you see more stuff from Matt and our other artists as the series is going on, please share it and invite other people to come. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. We're going to have a YouTube channel very soon. You can subscribe there as well. And make sure you also become a member of our website so you can join our email list and get lots of goodies there that no one else will have access to. So, guys, this is the time to drop the questions in the Q&A. And we just had one come through, which I believe has just been answered. The question was, how do we purchase and select our first set of mallets? And Matt, can you tell us what your answer was?
Yeah, you want to choose a mallet that obviously doesn't cost $1 billion, and also one that's going to be useful for you. So I always encourage beginners to get a mallet that bounces back easily. So the way the taper of the stick, it bounces back. It trains you to use rebound, which is important for a lot of percussion playing. And more specifically, I really love those Vic Firth Tim Jennis line, not to be confused with Tim Jennis's own mallets, which he makes, which are a bit more money. But the Vic Firth Tim Jennis line, especially the Beethoven Hards, it's the number 3s, I think. They bounce back really easily, and you can work on finger and wrist, and it kind of trains you really well. I think they're really valuable mallets, and quite honestly, the core of those mallets inspired me. That level of core, it's like a hard felt core, because I generally don't like using wood core mallets because it's very punchy, depending on how you're playing, of course, because I like to throw the mallets a little bit more, so I like it to absorb, which is why I like flannel, leather, and then for the felt mallets with a core, I like felt cores more than wood. And these have felt cores, and I love that. So I think it's a good mount. They're not very expensive comparatively. That's a good first mallet, I think, for a lot of things.
Sounds like an excellent suggestion. Those were in my bag very early on as well. So yeah, it sounds about right. Guys, also, if there's no more questions, that's gonna wrap up the class. So please keep them coming through. But the last thing to say is just that also at the link there that you can register for the rest of the awesome classes that are coming up. This was the first of the Excellent Assistant with Mr. Matt Strauss, but we have also coming up Andy Watkins, David Liu, Scott Christian, all from major orchestras all over the world. So it's a lot of great content on the way. And Matt, if you want to leave us with any closing thoughts about maybe something inspirational like you've been doing throughout the whole class of the theme, which is why not do both? You've talked a lot about breaking it down. Like as percussionists, we learn a lot of these specific detailed structures, way to get ready for auditions and performances. Yeah. And you can apply those same techniques to timpani. Do you have any other tips or mental things like that to get people behind the pauken, the tubs, and go for it?
I believe that it's important not only to do why not do both in timpani percussion, but why not do both concert percussion / timpani and chamber music and new music. I think some people a lot of people benefit from playing chamber music. In other words, being very close to someone, having the responsibility of having to cue someone in, breathing, watching, because that's what we do in the orchestra, except there's just more distance with our section and others. So playing chamber music is a really important part of your education. And even now I try to do solo and chamber music as much as possible. I'm doing a world premiere of a Jennifer Higdon double percussion concerto with Svet Stoyanov with the Houston Symphony in the first week of May. And then we're doing it at University of Miami the following fall. And then we're doing it at Cabrillo and then some other places and at festivals as well, TBD. So that type of stuff is really important. It makes you a more complete musician, just like I said, doing concert percussion and timpani does as well. Like I said earlier in the class, listen to music all the time, all this music, get charged up about it. There's value in what we're doing. I mean, all the things that happen in this world make you question sometimes mankind. But then when you listen to music and see art, it's like, oh, actually, our species is pretty awesome. Let's focus on that. And we're kind of at the forefront of that as far as I'm concerned. Because many years from now, people will look back in this time and they're going to look back at stuff that we do. And it's going to be like, that was beautiful. Wow, okay. Mankind and scientists and all these. So we're part of that. And I just want you guys to remember that. You're not just hitting a drum for a living, but you're making art. And it's for everyone. And
that's far more eloquent than what I had to add, but I do also just want to say, remember, guys, that it's lifelong learning. Like Matt is saying, it's not when you become 26 and now you need to have made your decision, or when you win your first job, or because you got into school now you have to choose. It's not like that. It's you forever are learning. I think, Matt, you will agree that you learn something new every season. Right? I mean,
every time I play a piece, even if I've played it 20 times, I learn something new. I do have to say my battery is about to die, and I'm not close to my charger.
No worries, no worries. we have to. Everybody, let's all at our computers, all at home. Everybody, please, let's give a big round of applause to Mr. Matthew Strauss. If you guys want to, if you've only seen part of the class, if you came in late, the recording will be available on both Facebook and on our website. In our library, our Masterclass library. So you can go to percussionconservatory.com/library, and this class will be available there.
And my demonstrations also will be available, just the actual playing as a separate link?
Yes, and also the video that you had been seeing me share will be available so that you can see all the excerpts that Matt had performed back to back. And I'm also going to edit in the title so you guys know what he's playing and when. And that's it. Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. It's so cool to have you here being, an artist for us at the Percussion Conservatory. It's really full circle for me, starting as your student, and now here we are, presenting this together. It's really, it's fun. It's just straight up fun. It's been a blast to get a lot of different people involved, but especially someone who meant so much to me, both in my hometown orchestra and then getting me prepped for Juilliard my first year, getting ready for the placement audition in the orchestra, and then, my final last step before becoming a professional. You were right there getting me ready to go, prepared for my trial and take that audition. So I owe you so much, and I'm forever grateful to it. And it's really, really cool to have you here doing this. So thanks.
Oh, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys. Until next time, we'll see you very soon, wherever you are in the world. Either good morning, good afternoon, or good night. And it's been another great class with the Percussion Conservatory. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.